On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Anant Gupta. He is the SVP of Engineering and Data Science at Included Health. We're going to be talking about what does it take to move up in the engineering ladder, right? What got you here may not get you there. And what does that mean? Like every level in your career will have its own challenges, from senior to staff to people manager. We're going to be talking to Anant about what those skills are. Do the best engineers move into people management? And what happens when you really want to move up? And it's talking about good to great to amazing. The levels you hit are going to be very important because obviously it's not just checking a box. Anant, thanks for joining the show to talk to us about this today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me over. This is a great topic and I'm really excited to be chatting with you.
Awesome. All right. Before we start, Included Health, what do you guys do over there?
Included Health is a personalized all-in-one healthcare company. We integrate care, expert guidance, financial, and administrative support all in one place so that we can provide access, answers, and advocacy to our members, bringing the mind, body, and wallet all together for members in dealing with healthcare. So think of consumer app, think of being able to talk to a doctor, being able to handle claims, benefits, things like that. And ultimately, what I want to do is we're trying to build the app for healthcare for everyone.
Awesome, man. It sounds like you guys are doing a lot of interesting things that Included Health. In terms of this episode, what got you here won't get you there. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack. You know, people are looking to understand what it takes to move up from different levels, from senior staff to people manager. In the end, a lot of times, really the skills that we're building and honing and what actually takes us to the next level are different. So a few different questions in there if you want to help us unpack that.
Wow. Yeah, there's quite a few questions here. But the what got you here is, and won't get you there, is actually maybe the first step in that. And personally, actually, even earlier in my career, I actually really struggled with this comment. Because when someone would say, Anant, what got you here won't get you there, I'd be like, what are you talking about? I am good as an engineer. I do this well. Because it sometimes felt like you're not validating me for who I am and expecting some different piece. In my journey, both at LinkedIn and Uber, going through that hyper growth, I was very fortunate to have some fantastic leaders, mentors who kind of coached me through that. And in doing that, what I realized was you're at every level within the organization, you're playing a very different role. I have recently very much got into cooking and I love cooking foods. And it's this realization of being a person who makes a really good dish is very different than from someone who can run a kitchen, which is very different than someone who can go and run a good restaurant and then run a Michelin star restaurant. And that skill set is vastly different. And I've been sort of using that to apply that to my own career, but then also talk about this in terms of various different levels. So to think about this from like a senior, like a software engineer, you're a chef, you're a line cook, and you're like really good at making these sort of dishes, things like that. As you get to more senior level roles where you're leading teams, it's kind of like leading a bit of a kitchen. And then you sort of go forward from there. And now for all my chef folks who might be listening here, I have never worked in a kitchen. This is my views of what it would be like from the outside. But that reflection of you have to change your skills. You have to think about the world differently. The things that got you here, oh, I'm really good at making this particular dish, to, wow, I need to run a restaurant. And that means I need to understand not only what happens in the kitchen, but what happens at the front of the restaurant. How do I think about ingredient sourcing? How do I think about marketing, brand? It's that sort of broadening of your aperture. And that part is a much different experience. And I see that with engineers where you get to a certain spot, you're not thinking about the bigger picture. You're not able to understand the business. You're not able to look at the other elements. And those might be either blind spots, or other times it may be your ego gets in the way of it. Like I know for me, that was sometimes a struggle when I was an engineer, being like, I am really good at software engineering, like tech runs the world. But there's so much more. And I think if you can bring all of those things together, and the other element of that is coaching and advice and things like that too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very complex topic. It's a complicated conversation. You'd mentioned, obviously, each level has its own challenges, and you said the analogy to a kitchen's great. Hopefully, people can relate to that just from a conceptual basis, even if they haven't worked in a kitchen. When you're thinking about the skills you develop as an engineer, they're problem-solving skills. You learn fundamentals that aid in that career path. It almost feels that once we start moving people into manager and leadership roles, it's an entirely different skill set. It's an entirely different career path. That, as you mentioned, the skills that got you there won't carry you. The opportunity to pick up those skills, right? Obviously, we have people in lead positions. We give people some empower them to lead smaller teams, projects to help them ramp up. That's still a far gap from being a people manager. And I guess my question to you is that senior to staff to people manager transition, that transitionary period where people are moving to staff and they're becoming lead, is that enough of a preview? Is that or people who have aptitude to be people managers, they're going to excel because they're just going to pick up the nuances and just develop and mature on their own?
There is a part of me that sometimes wonder, is everybody suited to be a people leader? Can anyone be a people manager? Like, there's a part of me that wants to believe yes, because I want to believe in the good and all of those things. But what I've also found is, on the other hand, is what is the level of effort and what's the level of work you're willing to put in? It can't be tomorrow me just saying, I want to be a Michelin star chef. Like, maybe, but that's going to require a lot more effort for me. And there's going to be other folks who are maybe more natural at cooking. I've had more years of experience, more years of practice. And it kind of showcases to what's your background, what are the opportunities you've had, what are the ways by which you've practiced. And so when I've been thinking about this in terms of that transitionary phase, the question for me that I look at is like, what are the gaps? And for your gaps, there's going to be some element that I think everyone goes to, is like, oh, people management. But people management is a part, I won't say small, but it's maybe 30% of the part of what it makes for a great engineering leader, or not even engineering, like pick domain leader. People management's one part of it. There's strategy. How do you connect with people? How do you influence? How do you inspire? How do you motivate? How do you coach? Those things, you don't need to be a people manager to do that. And what I have seen is, if you take that opportunity to practice, and within that, I have Wade Chambers, who is someone I used to work with here at Included before. He used to talk a lot about this. It's like, how do you learn? How do you grow? And the idea here was this notion of looking at it in terms of declarative knowledge, like, can I read a book on this? Can I work through this? Second one was a practice. And third one was a believable source. And so, like, if you and I were talking about how do I brew beer, like, I can look through this, I can read a book, but reading a book will not make me an expert. Practicing and doing it multiple times will help. But then there's the believable coach, someone who you can trust, someone you can run through, ask and get that advice. And so what I would say would be, is like, for someone trying to make that leap, which of those three do you have access to? I'd like to believe Amazon has made a wonderful job in getting people access to wonderful books. These podcasts that you do and other ways to do that gets you access to declarative knowledge. The second element is, are you in a role that lets you practice those things? And I often find folks who will say something along the lines of, hey, Anant, I don't have the opportunity, therefore I'm not doing it. But if I had the opportunity, I would be amazing at it. And so that's where you kind of start digging in and saying, like, do you really not have the opportunity? Are there things you could do? Can you mentor other people? Can you coach other people? And there are definitely occasions where there's no such thing. And at that point, you should look at different roles. And then the third element, which I have found to be the biggest, one of the largest influences personally for me, is the right leaders. If you have the right coach, the right mentor, oh my gosh, it makes it so much easier. That doesn't mean you don't have to put in the work, but you can have someone who you can trust and bounce ideas off of, and that plays a big part and at least has played a big part in my career.
I love that, by the way. That's. I think you broke it down very clearly. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about your background, and maybe you can just reflect on your own journey real quick on this question. Was your career by design to move into leadership? And the reason I'm asking this is, a lot of times people get into jobs, they're happy to be employed. They want to build their skill set early career. They want to move up the technical engineering career ladder. That is the goal. And then what I'm hearing is, and again, as you become senior and you move up, not everyone does. We could even talk, I think I did an episode of people moving from senior to staff, that being a challenge and why. But in this case, if you're planning on moving into leadership, if it's by design, I definitely agree with you. I can see people start building those skill sets, because it's not an overnight transition. I don't think it's as easy to read a book. You have to find those opportunities to practice. I guess in your view, in the way your career developed, was like, did you go into engineering thinking, oh man, I will definitely one day be in leadership, that's where I think my career will go? Or is it just a case of, hey, that's the path that so far has taken you?
So I'll give you two answers. The first answer is like oftentimes when people look at their career in the back and look at it in rear view, I can tell you an amazing story where every step I took was super deliberate, super thoughtful, and I had meant to do this. And by the way, like some parts of it is chance, some parts of it is luck. The other side, though, is the career acceleration and growth that you want has to be deliberate over time. Mostly because I mean, there are folks who will stumble into success, but I have generally found if you want to be great at something, you have to put in the work. And so if I were to reflect back for my own career, like I had always wanted to go into some amount of people leadership. That was a thing that I had naturally gravitated towards, even if I were to look back at myself back in high school, like whether it's projects, teams, team sports. When I would look at college, like I wanted to be part of a team, and being a team leader was a thing that I naturally gravitated to. My first stint at management was at LinkedIn. And that's where I actually understood what it meant to be a manager. And in terms of there, the big change for me was around thinking about people's careers. Because in a school, you're not thinking about how do I help this individual get a straight A? I'm like thinking about how do we as a group pass our assignment? When you go into career engineering management, you're really now thinking about how do you help the entirety of the organization be successful? How do you help the people on your teams be successful? And I really enjoyed that. And in doing so, I actually got the exposure and the visibility into what it would mean to run an organization. And so when I was looking to find my next stage from LinkedIn and I joined Uber, I was looking at a company that I would get to work on mobile. So at LinkedIn, I had the pleasure of leading mobile teams very early days and kind of go through that. And I believe that mobile is going to be the future. And I wanted to be an engineering leader who is part of the next wave of that. And Uber was a big part of that. Uber was a company that at that time was going through hyper growth. And I was like, I want to learn more from the ground up versus something that's already pre-built. And I also wanted to sort of accelerate my own career. And I feel like a growing company sort of enables you to do that. And I also kind of, in that moment, you kind of also reflect on what size of company would I want to work at? What are the things that are important for me? And at Uber, I got to the exposure of seeing what it would be like to run a overall organization. And then I could see leaders who ran all of engineering at the company. And that in itself inspired me. And so now that I'm here at Included Health, I'm like, oh, that is fun. This has really been fun. It's been a craft. And it's something I still need to master. Like and each of these things takes time, but I want to be, my personal ambition, by the way, on this is I want to be the best at what I do. So when next time someone's like, who's an amazing head of engineering, they should want to talk to me, and that will take time. And so that's now my craft that I'm sort of building up, but it's that journey. But at each step, I would say you have to be deliberate. Otherwise, what we typically do is we do the sort of like the incremental growth. I'm really good at this. This other team needs me to do this, and there's some amount of new change. It's a new domain. Let me go do it. That's very different than sort of more capital case G growth, which is like, I'm going to rethink what are the most important things for me that will accelerate my career. And those sometimes feel very tricky. As a small example of this, which was when I left Uber to join Grand Rounds, oftentimes engineering leaders think about scope in terms of the number of people they manage. I took on a much, much smaller team when I joined here at Grand Rounds because I knew that the career growth that I'm going to go through is going to be far faster. The mission here is something that's way better. And the growth that I'm going to go through and the people I'm going to work with, the problems I'm going to solve are truly some things that I needed for my own personal growth. And that actually has, if I reflect on it, that was a really good call. And I have really enjoyed that as well.
And you touched on honing your craft, being the best at something. And I guess a question that might come up if I am looking at engineering and there's a technical excellence to engineering, obviously it might be more subjective than objective. There's different ways to develop software. So, but from a technical perspective, you have really good engineers and they progress in their careers. And obviously there is a point in which moving into management is one of the few options, right, for career advancement. Not always, right? There are technical paths, but eventually you get to principal engineer. Maybe your company has a chief architect, maybe, and that's not every company. But at some point, you'd have to want to be a people manager. And I'm not saying fair or unfair, but my question is those engineers that are really good at the technical side, and then they find themselves kind of running out of real estate. Is it a case where they've started developing those skills late? Are they potentially people just better suited to the engineering track? Have they not been given opportunities? Because I'd imagine as a principal, you would be given opportunities to lead people. And it's tricky because, again, eventually you run out of real estate on that career ladder.
Yeah, that makes sense. By the way, actually, it's funny because I was having an interesting conversation even on the management side of the world, which was there's not going to be like, to be a manager, you need an organization of a certain size to have people you're going to manage. And at some point you run out. Like for example, like if you were to pick Included Health, we're about 200 engineers. It's not like I'm going to be like, we have 15 VPs of engineering. Like there's going to be a finite number within the organization. And so it's a similar problem. But what I have seen, and I have wondered, I've thought about this a bit more recently, partially because of our conversation here, which is along the lines of like, what do you enjoy? Like, I think we oftentimes think a lot about progression and sort of a feeling of accomplishment. And that is very true. That's a very innate human desire. But I've also thought about this in terms of like, how much do you enjoy it? And like, what's the right sweet spot? I recently, a few years back, I was like, I'm going to learn how to ski, which was a big deal because I did not know how to ski. I grew up in India. But I realized I would be very happy doing blues. Like I have no deep innate desire to go do double blacks and things like that. That's really cool and interesting, but that's where I'm at. Like, I enjoy this. This is fun. I am not here to tell someone who is like wants to be a staff and their dream is to be a senior staff, principal staff, saying don't do this. But know that role is going to evolve and it's going to look very different. And that evolution of that role might be less on-time coding. It may be more influencing people. It may be more thinking about getting deeper on the business side, which may not be a thing that you enjoy. And if you do enjoy, that is awesome and lets you work through that. And the part here, I would say, is assuming the company is doing well. Like, there's a different answer here when the company's not doing well. But if you're in the right spot, the company's doing well, and you're really good at what you do, and you're building up the skills, your leadership team is incentivized to give you those opportunities. Like, when I think about this, which is whenever I come across a big problem, and similarly when Owen, who's our CEO, comes across a big problem, or my boss, Nupur, if they have a hard problem, they'll give it to the person they think is most likely to make it successful. And oftentimes those roles and functions are not just within your specific domain. They're actually more broad and holistic. And so that's the piece I would look at and encourage folks is like, if you want to do the next level, look at the skills, do that practice a bit more in that spot. I don't know if I fully covered that or not, but I mean, you can push me more on this one. I'll try to give a better answer.
No, I think we're getting there, and I think you answered a lot of the question. And there's something about my conversation with you, and now it's come up a couple times in a couple of episodes where the discussion is, you mentioned about progression and are you happy? I think there is a built-in ideology in society that there's a career ladder and we have to move up, and we need to move up, and if we don't move up, that means somehow I have not quote unquote succeeded. You just said maybe you're happier, and I think the person who was talking about the transition from senior to staff engineer, where the conversation was maybe at a senior level you just live a better quality of life and you don't necessarily, not that you can't, you don't want. And I think everything I'm hearing from you, and especially, I did ask you a tricky question, in all fairness, it wasn't easy, I'm not going to lie, but what I'm hearing the answer is it might not be what you really want, because if you want to be a people manager, you're going to gravitate towards picking up those opportunities. I myself left technology 15 years ago. I moved into solution sales, consulting, running a BI practice. I realized I love that. I didn't want to go back to coding. That didn't leave me a ton of room. So I thought, I'm going to start my own company, which then I realized, okay, learning a whole different set of skills. But I started shifting away from being hands-on. I just noticed I was taking different jobs. I was looking for different roles. I was asking, can I go jump on this? And it was because I realized that wasn't something I enjoyed. And I think you bring up something really important, is to know yourself, because then that puts you so you can maneuver yourself right into those positions.
Exactly. And by the way, here doesn't mean that you're coasting. You can exactly, because you can be like, look, I am really good at problem solving and I love building software. And you can be really frigging good at this. And there is again, like if you think about what does it take to be the top 10% at something, that is a very different thing. And like, that's not and again, I'm not here to say coast, like live work-life balance. Like I'm not here to advocate. I mean, work-life balance is a personal thing. You should do whatever makes sense. But like, I'm here to say is like, the way you grow is not just the career ladder growth. It is different opportunities. And the other thing I would look at is like, why is this important to you is another piece. Like oftentimes people are like, no, that's what I'm supposed to do. Kind of like what you just pointed out. But if you peel a layer back, sometimes it's about compensation. Sometimes it's about recognition. Other times it's about being able to keep up with the friends and being able to say, hey, my friends got this, I need to do that. And if you understand that, you may act very differently. Like you may say, look, it's about compensation. You may pick roles that are very different. If you're really top 10% at what you do, maybe you go join a earlier stage company and take on a little bit risk reward. It's where what I have found is like, it's where we're not willing to make any trade-off and then point to the only way that can happen is if I just get promoted. That may not be the answer, but that's the answer we sometimes like because it's one that is not my fault. It is someone else's fault.
I think that's great. That's a great insight into that career progression. Because I think the other question I was going to ask you, and it's kind of piggybacking off of that, was if you don't get promoted, you end up leaving to another org looking for that opportunity. I just heard from you is if you hone your craft and you're the best, and it could be at any level, along the career path, it doesn't even matter. But if you are genuinely very good at the job, the doors are open no matter where, but also it just could be you're not at the right place to take advantage of the skill you're trying to continue developing.
Exactly. And then you can be much more deliberate about the job you take. Because if you're really good, by the way, again, I'm conscious there's some amount of privilege in the way I'm saying it, or like I feel very lectury. But like what I mean by that though is like if you have honed in your craft, you'll have more opportunities. If you have more opportunities, you can be more deliberate. You'll have fewer trade-offs to make. And therefore you can say, hey, I really want to practice this craft. I'm going to take a job that lets me go do it.
And that could be technical or people management.
Exactly.
So I don't think it's a privilege thing. I think, as you said, there's less of jobs as we move up. That is just innate. I mean, if you're the CTO of Google, there's not many other jobs to take on Earth. Like literally globally on the entire planet, there's only a handful of jobs. What you do after that, you go into VC because there's nobody else to go hire you. I'm just kidding. I really don't know. I'm just conjecture there.
One can try to imagine a world.
Exactly. I don't know that world, but what you're saying, which is really interesting, is that person has progressed at their scale to the best of their ability. And if you hone the craft, again, senior engineer, be the best senior engineer. I think it's something easy to say, but I think sometimes when we're looking at the promotion path, we're looking at the career ladder, we're thinking, how many rungs am I moving up? And I think what I'm hearing is it's probably more important to focus on the excellence that which I can achieve is then a natural fruition of me finding those opportunities. I think that's a great observation that you provided.
Exactly. And that also, I would just say, is like levels are arbitrary. Different companies have different levels. It's what they value. What's the skills they value? So focus on the skill because that's what you care about. If the company doesn't recognize it, maybe they're wrong, or maybe you haven't built the skill. So continue on that journey. But over time, your skills, if you're really developing and you're being honest, they should be obvious to people around you. If they're not obvious to people around you, then there's maybe a more deeper reflection that needs to happen. One might be is, actually, I am not achieving the skills that I think I'm achieving, so let's work through that. Or the other part might be is like, actually, the skills that I'm trying to build are not valued at the company the same way as I want them to. Maybe I need to find a different role.
Awesome. Anant, I appreciate you coming on the show. We could probably keep going, but I know you got to get back to it and do the day job. I appreciate the time. If someone's going to want to reach out, because obviously you covered a lot of different areas within a very deep lane, we might not have answered all the questions, so I might have a follow-up. What's a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah. Amir, by the way, first off, thank you for having me here as well. This has been super fun. I also appreciated your thoughtful questions. It also made me think about this as well. The best way to reach out to me is via LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is somewhere on the page here, but that will probably be the best way to do this.
Okay. Awesome. No, I appreciate it. That was a great conversation. Thank you for your time. And that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think these are great conversations. They're happening more on the show, which I didn't design, but they're just coming up. And I think sometimes we need to fill in these gaps, and sometimes there are things that we're predisposed to that don't necessarily always align. I think this idea of progression and developing skill and not focusing on career is something interesting, right? I think a lot of people will probably be like, hey, Amir, I've been taught to focus on moving up the career ladder first and foremost. And I think that's true. But I think in listening to Anant, it actually will happen. And you might actually have a better career by design if actually the skill becomes more material. You understand what that skill is you want to cultivate. So please share this with somebody else who might find this episode interesting. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.